In today's video, I'm going to review the Pattern Emporium About Town shirt, and this is it. I'll drop in some footage of me wearing it. Now, it did shrink slightly after I made it, which is entirely my fault. At least I think it is, because I always pre-wash my fabric, and I did pre-wash this fabric, but it's 100% cotton. I basically wash my fabric when it arrives from the manufacturer before I even put it away. Either I forgot or it shrunk some more, which is perfectly possible because, like I said, it's 100% cotton. It didn't shrink so much that I can't wear it, and it's meant to be a cropped shirt anyway. Has made the sleeves a little bit shorter, but I often wear this length sleeve anyway, so again, I'm not too worried. I'm going to talk in this video about the toile that I made and how and why I make such a thing. Now, a toile is sometimes called a muslin. That's muslin, not muslin. Those are different. And I'm going to teach you how to make a really quick and easy one in this video. So I'll show you the toile that I made in a moment, but let's talk about making a toile. Now, I like to use a plain coloured fabric. Of course, you can use any old fabric for this, but I just find it much easier to see the lines of something if I buy a plain fabric. Now, I don't do a toile as often for a knit garment because there are so many different types of knit garment, and knit garments are easier to fit anyway. What I do with my toiles is I tend to buy old sheets from a charity shop or a thrift store, and that way they're usually an off-white colour, and I can draw all over them with a biro, a ballpoint pen, so I can make any notes. I can write what things are on them, like collar and cuff and sleeve and wrong side and right side. Don't have to worry about getting this off because it's going to be something that I'm just going to use as a trial garment. Now, you want to consider when you're making a toile the parts of the garment and how important it is that they have the structure that you're looking for in the finished garment. If you're making something that's eventually going to be denim, of course it's not going to hang exactly the same way. If you're making out of a light cotton, it may not matter, but it may. Now, when you see the toile that I made, I actually just made the collar out of a single piece of fabric, and then I stitched around the edge and just cut the seam allowance off, because all I needed with this collar, which is a collar that lays flat anyway, it doesn't have a collar stand, all I needed was to see that it was the right size for me and that it fit on the garment nicely and that I liked the way it looked. Basically, I didn't want to alter it in any way, perhaps make it wider or longer or come lower down, and I could do that with a single layer of fabric. Now, if I was making something that had maybe a mock neck that stood up and had 2 layers of fabric, or maybe even some interfacing, then that might be quite an important feature, and it might be very important that I had that looking as it would look in the finished garment. So you can take shortcuts, but you want to consider with those shortcuts whether it's going to affect the way the finished garment hangs. The other thing you want to do, which I found out with this toile, was you always want to attach the sleeves if it has sleeves. So it's very easy to sort of make the body and then think, oh, this is way too big, or it's got these weird wrinkles, but you need to attach all of the parts of your toile to make sure that it's hanging as it will in a finished garment. And I found with this one, the body felt much too big until I attached the sleeves, and then it seemed just fine. I actually made the toile with one long sleeve and one cap sleeve because those are options that are in the pattern. It's also got a short sleeve option, but I was less interested in that. I tend to be a person who either likes long sleeves or no sleeves, or just a short sleeve here. So there are multiple reasons why I wanted to test this garment out. I wanted to see how the collar lay. I wanted to see how low the neckline was and if I would need to raise that a little bit. As you get older, you don't always want your cleavage on full show. Not judging, you do you, whatever you like. And I didn't end up shortening this one too much, but I did make a slight adjustment to it. I also wanted to check the sleeve length. It has quite a, it's not complicated, it's quite a clever sort of fold and fold again hem on the cuff. And so it was quite hard for me to judge just from the pattern pieces. And of course, they're not being attached, you can't quite see where the shoulder falls. And it also has a slightly forward shoulder seam here. So just wanted to see how the sleeve length was on me, because my arms are a little bit shorter and I do often have to shorten sleeves a little bit, and I did on this one. Also wanted to see how long the garment was on the cropped length, and that was very helpful for me too. Of course, I wanted to see how the bust dart fit, and this pattern has the option for, I think it's you can have no bust dart, or you can have sort of a grade 1 or a grade 2. And remember that when you're sewing, your bust size in a sewing pattern is completely completely different from your cup size in a bra. So for instance, I am a double F cup. I know I'm very small, but there we go, endowed. I'm a double F cup in bras, but in sewing I'm a B cup, because with sewing the cup size, which you know, makes them design the dart to one size or another, the cup size is the difference between your high bust, in other words up here just under your arms before your bust really starts, and your actual bust, which is the measurement around the fullest part of your bust. So if you look at a pattern and you think to yourself, well, it only goes up to a C or a D cup and I'm much bigger than that, don't worry, it's not the same at all as the cup size for bras, and you'll be able to check with the pattern manufacturer's measurements and see which cup size you need to cut. The final thing I wanted to test with this toile, which was quite important to me, was that there is a cap sleeve option. Now, I generally avoid cap sleeves. I do have a top upstairs. I want to copy the pattern. Actually, it was a shop bought, a store bought top, and it has sort of a little ruffle around here, like a ruffled cap sleeve, and that seems to look really nice. But the problem I've got is I have incredibly square shoulders. I've got very narrow hips, no backside whatsoever, but I've got very square shoulders, and I do a lot of exercise and martial arts. So although I don't weight train as such, do a lot of weight bearing exercises, and so I have got muscle around my neck as well, which just makes me look even more like a rugby player. So I've got very square shoulders, and of course a very straight cap sleeve that sort of sticks straight out like that could exacerbate that. As it happens, when I made the toile, and I'll show it to you in a minute, and I'll show you a picture, a video rather, of me wearing it, I actually quite like the cap sleeve. So I need you to tell me in the comments if you think that cap sleeve looks okay on me. It would be a very simple pattern variation for me just to move this shoulder seam in a little bit and add a small ruffle instead of a cap sleeve, which would certainly accentuate my broad shoulders less. It's not that I dislike them, but I don't want to look unbalanced. I actually think the cap sleeve maybe didn't look too bad on me, but I want you to let me know. So let's have a look at what I did. So let's go through the pieces I've cut out so far and what I've actually done to them. So I haven't got them in any particular order here. I'm just going to put them out of reach and then bring them in one at a time. So this is the long sleeve. It's inside out at the moment. You can see I'm just using ballpoint pen for the markings, and I literally probably somewhere on here have written in great big words sleeve. So there we are. You can just draw all over them. And here you can see I've got the double fold cuff done, ready for the first top stitching, and I've pressed this open. Even though I'm going to be as minimal and as quick as possible with this project, I'm still going to press it because it'll just put it together more easily. So that's my long sleeve. Now there are 3 sleeve options in this pattern. There's a cap sleeve, a long sleeve and a short sleeve. So obviously I've only got 2 armholes, so what I'm going to do is put the long sleeve on one side and the cap sleeve on the other side. Now I might after that work out whereabouts on this particular sleeve the short sleeve would end, and just once I've judged if I like the long sleeve, if it needs to be shortened, probably will because I've got quite short arms, then I might just cut this off at where the short sleeve is, so that in future if I want to make that version I'll know if I want it a little longer. And I may well want it a little longer. I'm fairly big busted, and sleeves that end directly level with your bust don't tend to look good. They tend to accentuate your bust, so I'll probably prefer to have this particular sleeve just above the elbow. But the first version we're going to make is actually going to be the long sleeve, so that's why I'm checking that. Here I have the little epaulette. I have to still, I can see I've done one seam and turned this, so what I'll need to do now is trim these corners off, and then I'll stitch it across here, turn it inside out. And I thought it would just be nice just to try the epaulette on the on one of the cuffs and see how that looks. So this is interesting. Here I've got the collar. Now with a standard collar you'll cut 2 of them, you'll stitch them together, turn them inside out, there'll be some interfacing to stiffen them. Now all I've done with this is I've cut 1, and then I've stitched the seam allowance around the outside, and I've actually trimmed off the seam allowance close to this stitching, and this is something I do just to speed me up when making a toile. Now because this collar is just a single layer, of course it's not going to hang in the same way that an ordinary collar is. And if I was doing something like a collar that had to stand up or had a bit of body to it, I certainly wouldn't just do one piece like this. But this is a collar that just lays flat and open, and all I really want to judge is the size of the collar and whether I might want it, a bit shorter or a bit longer. So I'm quite happy just to have one piece of fabric just representing the collar. I've left the bottom seam allowance on because that's where I'll attach it to the body. Here I've got a pocket. You can see I just stitched around the outside and pressed, and then pressed this in place. I'll just stitch across here. This is pretty much as it would be constructed without the edge finishing there, which is done on an overlocker. So here is the front piece, and I've stitched the darts in, so I've got the darts here. This is actually the pocket placement, and this is the bust mark to tell if you've got the darts to the right height or not. Now, I was toying with the idea of actually making this with the darts on the outside. Because it's a test garment, sometimes it can be a little bit easier to have the darts on the outside so you can just see where they're going to sit, but I thought I'd put them on the inside. So if I want to transfer these markings through, I'll just push a pin through, or I may even be able to see through the fabric and just draw on the right side. And I'll stitch the pocket on where the pattern has said to put the pocket on, just to see if I like that or if I want to adjust that pocket line. Now the front is stitched together, so the idea is that the front stitches together up until a little way from the neck, and this is just a tacking stitch here, and then we'll top stitch, and then it'll open out to the neck opening, and here it is ready to be top stitched. So I'm going to do that as I would usually do. I've done some stay stitching around the neck edge there. We've got the darts in place, and here is the hem. Now when I finally stitch the hem, what I'll tend to do is what I did for the collar. So rather than in the pattern it tells you to turn up 1 centimetre and then turn up I think another 5 centimetres, so I know that I've got a total of 6 centimetres there. So all I will do is I'll run a machine stitch around at 6 centimetres, and then I'll just trim the hem off close to that stitching like I've done here, because all I want to see is just how long this is. This is the cropped version. It's supposed to sit kind of high hip, so I'll just chop that off and see if I like the length. And by getting this shortest version right, and I do tend to like things that are cropped, I'll then have something in future to judge. If I want to do, for example, the dress length, I can measure from that crop length and see how long I want the dress. So that's that. Here I have the other sleeve, which is quite a clever design. This is the cap sleeve, and it sort of comes out as one big bubble shaped piece, and then you stitch it together and fold it in half. So you don't have to hem this edge. You've got a double layer of fabric here, and these are the markings for the front and the back. Now the reason I was keen to try this out is because although I love the design with that little straight cap sleeve, I don't tend to suit cap sleeves, and it's a very boxy shape. I have incredibly broad shoulders and narrow hips. I'm already an inverted triangle, so I'm concerned that this won't look flattering on me, that it's going to make my shoulders look wider. But I'm more than prepared to give it a go, so I'm going to try it out. Now I do like that shoulder coverage, but what I sometimes find is that a looser style suits me better. So if I find that this looks nice, then I'll keep it for the next time I make this pattern for the summer. If I find it's not very flattering, then what I might do, I'm fairly good at pattern drafting, is I might turn this into a fluted or gathered sleeve. I've got a blouse that I bought from a shop that's already like that. So the sleeve's like this, but it's got all this gathering, and so it's just a little bit softer and doesn't accentuate my square shoulders. But I'm going to try it as the pattern suggests first of all and see how I like this. Lastly, I have the back piece, and all I've done here is stay stitch the neckline. So the next thing to do with this will be to sew the front and the back together, to put the collar on, sort out those tacking stitches at the front, chop the hem off and put on the 2 different sleeves and see how it looks. Now you can see from this fabric here, I have got 3 different fabrics here. I tend to get my fabrics for making toiles from secondhand or charity shops here in the UK, and I'll just buy old bed sheets for these, or if I've got any old sheets laying around, or any old plain pieces of fabric. Of course you can make a toile from any old fabric. It's a good idea to somewhat match the type of fabric to the garment that you're sewing, but generally speaking a thin cotton will do for most woven garments. and a pale one like this is just easier because then you can just write all over it. And when I'm stitching it as well, you'll probably see that there's different colours stitching. I use this also as an opportunity to use up any sort of reels of cotton that have just sort of not got enough for a project on, because that way I don't end up, of course you can use it for hand sewing, but I don't end up with tons and tons of reels of cotton with tiny amounts on. It's a great opportunity to use them up to make this toile garment, and I'm really excited to see how it all works out. I'll finish putting this together and then I'll show you. So here is my first finished version. So the collar was kept pretty much the same. I'll drop in some footage down the side of me wearing this as well. I did raise the neckline just by 1 centimetre. Now you can see that the front seam comes up at a right angle, and then it does actually, it's not just open here, it does actually curve out slightly, or I should say splay out would be a more accurate description. So it would be, you know, it's possible to pull it in after it's made, but obviously that's a better adjustment to make on the pattern. So a lot of people on the Facebook group said this was a little on the low side for them. I do understand, especially if you're a little older. I'm a little older, I'm also quite shameless, but I just took it up 1 centimetre. I was quite pleased with the pockets here. I cut them on the cross and I was very careful with them to get them even. I was actually this is centre front seam here and you can barely see it. I was actually really pleased to, that wasn't intentional. Of course I intended to cut it symmetrically, but I didn't realise that I'd got it almost exactly as the pattern appears. So you barely notice there's a front seam at all. And you can see at the back it's got that stitching there. I did use my overlocker on it. I do sometimes with woven garments like to do everything with French seams and everything sealed in. But on this occasion, time was short, and again, I used the overlock around the armholes there. I found when I turned the sleeves in, unless you've made this pattern, you won't quite understand how it's constructed. It's a strange construction, but also very clever. It's designed so that when you turn it, the first seam is enclosed here. Now, I found that when I turned it, I hadn't quite caught it. So I made this seam here 1 centimetre rather than, you know, the usual 1/4 inch. Forgive me going back and forward between metric and imperial. That's kind of what we do here in the UK. But that just solved the problem. I could have, you know, repressed everything and trimmed things around, but that was what I did. I actually used a sew-in interfacing with this, which I don't think helped matters. But actually, I'm fairly pleased I did, because at least the collar hasn't gone wrinkly. I have a terrible job with iron-on interfacing. I found it's a little bit better if you get the woven iron-on interfacing, but I didn't have any, only had sew-in interfacing. I didn't even know it was sew-in until I started pressing it, and it wouldn't stick, but there we are. It's safe anyway. Now, I did, the bust darts are here, and I did lower the bust darts just about 1.5 centimetres, I think, just from looking at how they sat on me on the toile, and that's not an unusual thing for me as I'm larger busted. Let's trim that off, won't I? There we are. The main adjustment I made to this pattern was actually at the hem. Now, this is designed to have a really deep hem. You see this deep hem here, which makes it hang very nicely, especially on this, which is the cropped version. The problem is that on the toile, it was sitting, as you can see from the last clip, it was sitting too high at the front. Now, a few people have had this problem in the Facebook group, and the answer that they're given is, well, you know, you just need to do a larger bust adjustment. But actually, the bust adjustment for me was already fine. It wasn't that at all. And you're always going to get that with a garment that's designed to be straight cut, because to have a deep hem like this, unless you're going to gather it on the back, you've got to cut it pretty much straight. You can't have much curving going on there. So I knew as soon as I did that adjustment, what I did was, not only did I curve down at the front, but in order to accommodate that, I actually curved up at the side. So there is now, it's not a huge curve, but there is now a curve on it. And I figured out this adjustment, and then I sort of sighed, because I thought, oh no, I'm going to have to make a facing, because there's no way that, as I said, a very deep hem will turn up neatly on a curve unless you do something on the back like pleating or gathering. And there we are. So I made a facing. I basically just traced the same shape again, added my seam allowances on. And actually, I didn't even interface it, because it wouldn't have been interfaced if it was a hem anyway. So you know, it worked so well, and it was actually, the sewing of it was much easier than I was expecting. So if that's an adjustment you need to make, I wouldn't even worry about doing it. I think it's made it sit much more nicely on me. I do feel, because it's winter here now, I do feel like should I have made the cropped version, because obviously it's a little colder, but I tend to wear a vest under my shirts anyway. By vest, I mean one of those stretchy camisoles. And I certainly think in a lighter fabric, a chiffon or something, this might make a nice blouse in a longer length that could then be tucked in. But overall, I've got the shirt I wanted to match the jeans that I had planned this outfit to go together, and I couldn't be happier. So yeah, quite happy with the job. I did matching seams. Now when I of course I cut this out, and we've got the bust dart there. Now as soon as you dart one side and not the other side, it's going to mean that you can't completely match along here. So what you want to do is match at the hem. So you can see that on the side seams here, I matched these stripes that go across like this at the hem. That's quite easy to do. Just take a note when you cut the side piece of whereabouts it ends on the pattern piece, and then just make sure that the same is for the one that you cut for the back, and so that it matches pretty much. I mean, it doesn't match in both directions, but the stripes that way match pretty much all the way up until you get to the darts. There's only that little bit there where they're offset, and of course I knew that would be under the arm, so that is fine. Quite pleased with the pattern matching elsewhere. I just made sure, of course, that pieces that I cut were cut, you know, with this big stripe central. We've even got some sort of fairly nice shoulder matching coming down here of these white stripes. Again, this is a different shaped piece. It's not going to match exactly all the way around, but you do want to make sure it's symmetrical. So in other words, you want to make sure that you're cutting both pieces. Of course, they're mirrored, but you want to make sure that you're cutting both pieces the same. For example, one of these in the center point of the seam, and that will ensure that your sleeves don't look different to each other when you're wearing. So if we, you can probably see on the footage that I drop in anyway, but if you see like this, they're both the same. So a really great pattern. I'll certainly be making this one again. Probably the easiest collar that I have ever done. I do sometimes hand stitch a collar on the inside, and that's something that I might consider doing in the future as well. I did top stitch as I was asked to in the pattern all the way around, but honestly this collar would have sat fine without the top stitching too. And with the hem, I top stitched not only the hem, and also I did the 1/4 inch there, just because I think it matches this sort of jeansy style shirt. Overall, a really good pattern, and I'm excited to make some summer versions of this, perhaps with the cap sleeve too. So I hope you enjoyed that video. Let me know if you have this pattern or if you're going to purchase it. Forgive Mr. Gimlet's shaved legs here. He had a very scary and unpleasant time at the vet's yesterday, and I had 2 phone calls saying that he was probably going to die. He did not die. Trust him to have a flipping awful allergic reaction to something. He's always been a very difficult cat. I'm very pleased that he's fine again now. I'll see you again very soon.